We were horrified and shocked and sickened to learn what had happened to him and to see what had happened to him.
Fight or flight. With United, it was both this week as a passenger is physically, forcefully removed from an airplane, and it was all caught on camera. Welcome back to RIP. On the panel right now, a Green Beret, the former captain of a Special Forces unit in Vietnam, former chief of the Franklin Police Department, and former chief of the Wayne County Airport Authority. Edward Blum is here. We thank you for your service. Next to him, a woman who's booked thousands of flights for hundreds of passengers, Kate Roseveare, president and owner of Travel Leaders of Plymouth. You've already met Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, and you may have heard the name of Matt Friedman, an expert in what we call crisis communication. If and when a company makes a big mistake, his public relations firm is the number to call. And of course, we always call Charlie to give us the legal spin on these issues. Well, what a week. Now, Ed, I don't want to point fingers, but as we speak tonight, 3 members of the Chicago Airport Police Department have been suspended because of what happened on board that plane. Now, as you see it, who's to blame?
Well, first of all, they were put in a very difficult situation. They had to respond. The person was already on the plane. All that should have been taken care of at the gate. But once they got there, things kind of went downhill real fast. And I think if you look at the film, the officer in the plain clothes, once he got there, things really took a downturn. And you have to remember, though, these weren't police officers. These were this aviation security. And they are pretty much security guards, really. Chicago Police handles O'Hare Airport. They should have been the ones that responded. Why they didn't, I don't know. But there's no way that I can, as a chief of police, that I could justify this kind of treatment to a 69-year-old man who had a ticket, was allowed on the airplane, had a seatbelt on, was ready to go, and all of a sudden he's told that he's got to get up and he's got to go. And, you know, what happened to him, 2 front teeth missing, a broken nose, a concussion. There's just no way you can justify that. And the one officer, I would not be surprised if he's subject to criminal prosecution.
He went too far in your estimation?
Yeah, after they review this. But totally went too far.
I think too, Kate, though, I think most people don't realize that, frankly, this could happen to any one of us. The airlines have the right to do what they just did. They have the right to remove you from your seat even if you pay for it.
That's correct. That's Department of Transportation rules. Under certain circumstances, it is allowable. Generally, it's best if this can be anticipated and passengers not boarded, but sometimes things happen at the last minute, which apparently was the situation here. They needed to get a crew to Louisville. My understanding is that there had been some prior delays, that some of these folks had already been in the airport for a length of time. Tempers get short. People, we are impatient, and it's an interesting fact of life. I have clients over the years who try to anticipate when they might get bumped and will deliberately book situations where they will be bumped so that they can collect $200, $300, $400, $600, $800, $1,600. That's the interesting thing, is that they weren't able to persuade others on this aircraft.
Well, my understanding that Dr. Dow was offered $800. He at first said yes, but he assumed he could get another flight that night to Louisville. When they said, yes, you'll get the $800, but we can't guarantee you another flight until the next morning, he said, well, no, I don't want it. I'm going to remain on this plane. Now, is there a limit to how much an airline can offer you?
There is, and that's a DOT rule. I think the maximum is around $1,360. It's predicated on if the airline is able to reaccommodate you within an hour or get you to your destination within an hour or 2 hours of the time that you originally were scheduled to arrive. The airline does not have to accommodate, but they do not have to compensate you in any manner. Once you go to beyond the 2-hour period, there is a compensation requirement. There is a ceiling set by the Department of Transportation. Up to 4 hours, I think it's up to 200% of the fare, 400% on international fares, the one-way fare.
Yeah, exactly.
So there are very specific guidelines set forth by the Department of Transportation at this point in time.
But one thing for sure, this should not have happened, Matt. And so when you look at United Airlines, when you look at the CEO who initially defended his employees, but who a day later said, oh, no, it's the airline's fault. But you have this viral video running constantly. You have Dr. Dow and his family now threatening a lawsuit. You have demonstrators outside of the airline offices. How do you fix a situation like that?
Well, the problem started on Monday morning when apparently United didn't understand they were in crisis until the crisis had mushroomed to a point and they had trouble catching up. And I think what happened there were the lawyers and the PR people got into a tug of war, and the lawyers won. And that's why you saw a cryptic statement coming first from the CEO, and then a little bit more cryptic statements internally from the CEO. Then the PR people were able to tug the rope a little bit harder, and you saw a much more contrite statement from the CEO and a TV interview from the CEO. The problem is he only did one interview, and you're never just one interview away from fixing a crisis. They need to go into a mode now, and number one, operationally, run a good airline, and number two, from a communications standpoint, let the world know that they're running a good airline. Anything less than that will be trouble because there's no margin for error at that company now.
Meanwhile, there's a big lawsuit pending, Charlie, and I've heard you say you don't think this lawsuit will ever go to trial.
This case cannot go to trial because you can't never get a jury. Ask anybody here on it, if we're all a jury, have you ever had your bags lost? Have you ever been delayed on a flight? You think a jury's going to have any sympathy to an airline? It's not going to happen. No way, absolutely not. This case must be settled. It will be settled, and it's probably going to cost the airlines a lot of money.
So he could end up with enough money to buy his own plane.
Maybe he could. Maybe he could.
Meanwhile, Debbie, people see something like this and they want a solution from Washington. Do you have one?
Well, I think the last time we saw the airlines have this kind of crisis, and quite frankly, I don't think it's nearly as bad as this one was, when people were on the runway here in Detroit for 7 or 8 hours. John Dingell, someone we all know and love, introduced something called the Passenger Bill of Rights. DOT did, within months of that incident, come out with a Passenger's Bill of Rights. Most definitively, you're going to see a spotlight again on what a Passenger's Bill of Rights should be, study the issue, understand you're going to see changes and further protections. Never should have happened. Worst public relations nightmare I've ever seen.
So where do we go from here? Do you fly United again? Or do you boycott the airline? Or do you think that maybe this airline has learned from its mistake and may be better than ever before?
Well, don't you have to say, I don't, if there are criminal charges, I think the airline's going to be in a little stuck position because they may say, hey, wait a minute, we're going to fire these bad cops, whatever they are, get rid of them, but it's not a United problem, it's these cops' problem. You don't want to get into that situation. I think United has a terrible PR problem. They should say, we made a mistake and we want to make that doctor whole. They should do it right now, and they're not doing it.
One of the things that companies learn in this situation is that if you treat your customers like they're stupid, they will prove to you that they're not. We've all been on delayed flights before. If there's one thing that unites us now as a culture and a society, it's we can't stand having to travel and deal with all of this. We know what's supposed to happen at the gate and on an airplane. So United needs to over and over and over again say that they agree with us and stop doing things like this. We're all armed with our cell phones, with live streaming video at any time. They have no margin for error.
And even though Dr. Dow's past came out again, we found out that Dr. Dow had written prescription drugs in exchange for sex with a male patient. But many people said, so what? He was convicted, served probation, got his license returned 2 years ago, and is a practicing physician. And I was surprised by the people of this country that remained on his side despite this personal history that also became public.
This is an airlines issue, crisis. It's not, United is the company that's experiencing the immediate reputational issue, but everybody's had a negative airlines experience, and this is every bit of anger that every passenger's had is going to come out in the next few.
And this is their second boneheaded decision in the last 2 weeks.
Repeat offenders.
I really think that they've got a real management problem, and it's coming from that CEO because he came out and complimented his people.
Initially. Yeah. By the way, United made $10 billion in the last 2 years. Just want to
I make a bet they don't these next two.
All right, you've heard from the panel. Now it's your turn when Charlie takes the show on the road. Stay with us. It's still shocking to see. I certainly think United has learned something, but what have we as a country learned from what we've seen, do you think?
I hope we've learned that when something bad happens, be honest about it. Have a conversation with your audiences, and that will minimize the damage.
Ed?
Yeah, and sometimes you have to stop and think before you take such drastic action. Especially in today's society with cell phones and people filming everything. It's just take a deep breath.
But in all the years you worked at the airport, you never encountered anything like that.
No, and we removed literally hundreds of people off airplanes for being disorderly, not paying attention to flight crews, that sort of thing, but never had a problem like this. Never had a problem like this. Never responded to someone who was ticketed and we already on the airplane that we had to remove. So this is a very, very unique situation that was created by United.
And your advice for your clients, Kate?
The advice for my clients always is get to the airport at least 2 hours ahead of time, because one of the things that I have learned in this process is that they typically deplane the last people who show up. When it comes down to having to make the decision about who do we remove, most of the airlines go to the very last people to show up. They may have showed up still within the boarding time frame, but the last ones to show are the first ones to be removed.
I know some people are clamoring for more regulations, but some people say we already have too many as it is.
We got to figure out what happened, what went wrong, and make sure that everybody in this country gets treated fairly, decently, with dignity, and never stand for something like this again.
There it is, panel. We thank you for your comments and your insights. And we thank you for watching this edition of Let It Rip.